The night of August 13th, 2018, in Frederick, Colorado, seemed ordinary. A quiet suburban neighborhood, houses lined neatly, the kind of place where families felt safe. But inside one of those homes, silence carried a secret that would soon shock the world. Chris what appeared to be the perfect family man. He lived with his wife, Sean-Ann, and their two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. To neighbors and friends, they looked like the picture of happiness: smiling photos, family trips, social media posts filled with love. But behind the smiles, something darker was brewing. Sean-Ann was a devoted mother, full of energy and warmth. She worked hard, balancing her career with raising her children, and she often shared her life online, showing the world her love for her family. But Chris had grown distant. His calm demeanor masked a storm inside. On that August morning, Sean-Ann returned home from a business trip. She was tired but hopeful, eager to reconnect with her husband. What she didn't know was that Chris had already made a decision, one that would change everything. Friendly narration, and if you're following this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happens next is almost impossible to believe. By the next day, Sean-Ann and the girls were reported missing. Friends grew worried when Sean-Ann didn't show up for a doctor's appointment. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. Concern turned into panic. Police arrived at the Watts home. Chris greeted them calmly, claiming he didn't know where his family had gone. He suggested Sean-Ann might have taken the girls to a friend's house. His voice was steady, his face composed. But something felt off. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sean-Ann's car was still in the garage, her belongings untouched. It didn't look like a woman had left voluntarily. The search began. Neighbors joined in, and the media quickly picked up the story. A missing mother, two young children, and a husband pleading for their return. It was the kind of case that captured national attention. But beneath Chris's calm exterior, cracks began to show. His interviews seemed rehearsed, his words hollow. He spoke of wanting his family back, but his eyes betrayed something else. The narration slows, pulling the audience closer. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about strangers. They're about the people closest to us, the ones we trust the most. Investigators noticed inconsistencies. Chris's timeline didn't add up. His behavior seemed detached. And soon, suspicions turned toward him. The disappearance of Sean-Ann Watts and her two daughters quickly became national news. Cameras crowded the quiet neighborhood, reporters stood outside the Watts home, and the world watched as Chris Watts stepped forward to speak. On television, Chris appeared calm. He pleaded for his family's safe return, his voice steady, his expression controlled. He told reporters he wanted Sean-Ann and the girls back, that he missed them, that he hoped they were safe. But something about his demeanor unsettled viewers. His words sounded rehearsed, his emotions strangely absent. Friendly narration, and if you're following this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happens next will leave you speechless. Investigators noticed the same thing. They studied his interviews, his body language, his tone. He didn't seem like a desperate husband or father. He seemed detached, almost mechanical. Neighbors whispered their doubts. Friends who knew Sean-Ann spoke of her devotion, her love for her children, her constant presence online. It didn't make sense that she would simply vanish. Police began to dig deeper. They searched the Watts home, examined Sean-Ann's car, her phone, her belongings. Nothing suggested she had left voluntarily. Everything pointed to something darker. Chris's story began to unravel. He claimed Sean-Ann had taken the girls to a friend's house, but investigators found no evidence of that. He said he didn't know where they were, but his calmness betrayed him. The narration slows, pulling the audience closer. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. And in this case, silence was screaming. Detectives pressed harder. They asked Chris about his marriage, about his relationship with Sean Ann. He admitted things had been strained. He confessed he wanted a separation. But he didn't mention the secret he was hiding. Chris was having an affair. He had been seeing another woman, and his desire for a new life had grown stronger. Investigators discovered the affair quickly, and with it, a possible motive. Detectives questioned Chris repeatedly, probing his timeline, his actions, his emotions. He grew restless, his calm exterior beginning to crack. Then came the breakthrough. A polygraph test. Chris agreed to take it, confident he could maintain his composure. But the test revealed deception. His answers betrayed him. Investigators confronted him. They told him the results, they pressed harder, and finally, the mask began to slip. Chris confessed, not fully, not honestly, but enough to reveal the darkness. He claimed Sean Ann had harmed the children, and in a fit of rage, he had harmed her. It was a lie, a desperate attempt to shift blame, but it was the first crack in his facade. The narration deepens. Sometimes the truth doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it leaks out, piece by piece, until the silence can no longer hold it. Detectives didn't believe his story. They knew there was more. They pressed further, unraveling the lies, exposing the motive. Friendly cue, and if you're still with me, don't forget to like this video. Because the next part of this story reveals the shocking truth. The investigation intensified. Search teams scoured the area, looking for Sean Ann and the girls. The community held its breath, hoping for a miracle, fearing the worst. And then, the worst was confirmed. Chris led investigators to an oil site where he worked. There, hidden in the shadows of industry, lay the truth. Sean Ann's body was found in a shallow grave. Bella and Celeste were discovered nearby, their small bodies concealed in oil tanks. The silence shattered. The motive was exposed. The perfect family man was a killer. The discovery at the oil site shattered the illusion of the perfect family. Sean Ann's body, buried in a shallow grave, and the girls concealed in oil tanks, revealed the horrifying truth. The man who had once smiled in family photos, who had spoken calmly to reporters, was now exposed as a killer. Chris Watts was arrested. The calm mask he had worn for days finally slipped, replaced by the weight of reality. The world watched in disbelief. How could a father, a husband, commit such unimaginable acts? Friendly narration, and if you're following this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Because what comes next is the unraveling of a man's darkest secrets. In custody, Chris began to talk. At first, he clung to lies, insisting Sean Ann had harmed the children and he had reacted in rage. But investigators pressed harder, exposing the inconsistencies, dismantling his story piece by piece. The truth emerged slowly, painfully. Chris admitted he had killed Sean Ann. He confessed to smothering his daughters. His motive was chillingly simple. He wanted a new life, free from responsibility, free from the family that had once defined him. The narration slows, pulling the audience closer. Sometimes the darkest motives aren't complicated. Sometimes they're terrifyingly simple. And in this case, the motive was freedom. Chris described the events of that night. Sean Ann had returned home from her trip, tired but hopeful. They argued. He told her he wanted a separation, that he no longer loved her. The confrontation escalated. In a moment of cold calculation, he ended her life. But the horror didn't stop there. His daughters, Bella and Celeste, were still alive. They trusted him, looked to him for safety. And yet, he betrayed that trust in the most unimaginable way. He smothered them, silencing their voices forever. Friendly reminder, if you're watching closely, make sure you're following. Because this story isn't just about a crime, it's about the hidden motives that drive it. The details were unbearable, but they revealed the truth. Chris had planned to erase his family, to start fresh with the woman he was seeing. He believed he could build a new life, free from the responsibilities of fatherhood, free from the commitment of marriage. The community was devastated. Friends who had loved Shanann, who had seen her devotion to her children, struggled to comprehend the betrayal. Neighbors who had once admired the Watts family now recoiled in shock. The trial began, but it didn't last long. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Chris pleaded guilty. He admitted to the murders, sparing himself a trial, but condemning himself to a lifetime behind bars. The narration deepens. Sometimes justice doesn't erase the pain. Sometimes it only confirms it. And in this case, justice meant a lifetime of silence. Chris was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, his freedom gone, his motive exposed. Friendly Q, and if you're still with me, don't forget to like this video. Because the final part of the story reveals the lasting impact of a crime that shocked the world. The world moved on, but the story lingered. Documentaries, interviews, and books explored the case, dissecting Chris's motives, analyzing his psychology. People wanted answers, but the answers were as chilling as the crime itself. Chris Watts had chosen silence over truth, motive over love, freedom over family. And in doing so, he revealed the darkest corners of human nature. The courtroom was silent as Chris Watts received his sentence. Multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. No chance of freedom, no chance of redemption. The man who had once smiled in family photos, who had spoken calmly to reporters, was now condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The community mourned. Friends remembered Shanann's warmth, her devotion to her children, her constant energy. They spoke of Bella and Celeste, their laughter, their innocence, their trust. The loss was immeasurable, the betrayal unbearable. Friendly narration, and if you've stayed with me this far, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Because what comes next is the lasting impact of a crime that shocked the world. The case didn't end with the sentencing. It lived on in documentaries, interviews, and books. People wanted answers. They wanted to understand how a man could destroy his family, how silence could hide such darkness. Psychologists studied Chris's motives, dissecting his personality, analyzing his choices. They spoke of narcissism, of selfishness, of a desire for freedom at any cost. They described a man who valued his own desires above the lives of those who loved him. The narration slows, pulling the audience closer. Sometimes the darkest motives aren't about hate. Sometimes they're about indifference. And in this case, indifference was deadly. Chris's affair revealed his longing for a new life. He wanted to escape responsibility, to reinvent himself. But instead of facing the truth, instead of choosing honesty, he chose silence and violence. The world struggled to comprehend. How could a father betray his daughters? How could a husband betray his wife? The answers were chillingly simple, because he wanted to, because he believed he could, because his motive was stronger than his conscience. The Watts family case became a symbol of hidden darkness. It reminded people that appearances can deceive, that smiles can hide motives, that silence can conceal truth. Neighbors who had once admired the Watts family now spoke of their shock, their disbelief. Friends who had loved Shanann struggled to move forward, carrying the weight of her absence. The community rebuilt, but the scars remained. The narration deepens. Sometimes justice doesn't heal. Sometimes it only confirms the pain. And in this case, justice meant a lifetime of silence behind bars. Chris remains in prison, his freedom gone, his motive exposed. He lives in silence now, surrounded by walls that echo his choices. His story is a reminder of the fragility of trust, the danger of hidden motives, the power of silence. Friendly Q, and if you've followed this journey, don't forget to like this video and share it. Because silence speaks in ways we often ignore, and sometimes it tells the most powerful stories of all. The Watts family case will never be forgotten. It is a story of love betrayed, of innocence destroyed, of silence that carried a motive too dark to imagine. The camera fades out, the room dissolves into darkness, and only the echo of silence remains.